Let's do some front brakes on a 2011 Yaris today. What do you say? First step, jack it up. For me, I'm going to use a big floor jack, a low pro one, so we can get under here nice and good. And I'm going to go under the frame. Right there. And that way we can get this thing up a good amount, which will let the suspension unload and let that wheel hang down. Give us plenty of room. There we go. All you need is just to have enough room to clear the tire off the ground. Now, remove the hubcap, like so. Now, utilize a 21mm socket either on an impact wrench or a lug wrench and remove the lug nuts. And with that, your tire is off. Pull that guy up and out. And now we're looking at brakes. Okay, for those unfamiliar, this is your rotor. This is your caliper assembly. This is the caliper itself, where the hydraulic hose feeds into the back of it, pushes the piston out, which is what's in this circular bore here, and then it pushes against the brake pads onto the rotor. The brake pads are actually held onto the car with the caliper mounting bracket. So we got two things to take apart here. Number one are these 14mm bolts, which we're going to take out at the top and at the bottom. It's going to let the caliper itself come off, and then we're going to take the caliper mounting bracket off, which lets us do two things. One, remove the brake pads, and number two, slide off the rotor. Again, this is 14mm. Once you have both of these small bolts out, I'll take a jack stand, slide this caliper off. There's your caliper piston, and I'll just rest it on there for now. That way we keep tension off the brake line. Now we can clearly see our rotor right here in the middle and our two brake pads. And these are in good shape, but we've had an issue of terrible squeaking going on with the front of this car for a long time, and I've had it. We're going to replace everything and see if we can get rid of that sound. So now we have to take off this bolt here and this bolt down here, which are both 17mm bolts. Get those guys broke loose. And once they're out, this entire mounting assembly can come off, and then we can replace the pads within it. And it's marked there on the right hand side or the passenger side. Now, the rotor itself should just slide right off, just like so. If it does not, if you, because this does happen, and I would say semi-frequently, if yours looks like this after you take off that bracket and it does not move, it is rusted. The inside part of the rotor here is rusted to the hub behind it, to this. And you are going to either have to take a big sledgehammer and just bang the snot out of this part here, which is the only exposed back part of this that doesn't have a backing plate. And then you're going to want to put the car in neutral and rotate this about 90 degrees and hit it again, rotate it another 90, keep hitting it till it comes off. And depending on how bad the rust is, that can take a while. If you have access to the old blue flame or an acetylene torch, that is a faster way. Just take that torch, put some heat here around each lug stud, and then hit it with a hammer. And sometimes, even on occasion, you can hear this thing pop when you get it hot enough and it releases the rust bond. The third way, which is not ideal, is to fabricate a little kind of a homegrown solution here to press using the brake caliper pad mounting points here. It's kind of like a little bit of a press, and I've got a video on that I did on a BMW years ago. I'll link it, and well, maybe I'll put a tag here in the video so you can see it. I don't recommend that one if you can get it by without doing it. It does work, but it puts uneven stress on your hub assembly. No matter what you do, ditch the old rotor. Now, what I like to do is take a wire brush, clean all this stuff up as much as I can. I'm going to put a little bit of a smack of axle grease around it. Not much, just enough to form a film here to hopefully keep our new rotor from rusting on. With all that done, this is what I do. Take a little bit of axle grease, and I mean a little bit. Doesn't take much. If you're in the South, especially the Southwest, you might not understand why this is a thing to do. But if you are from the Midwest or somewhere in the world where they have harsh winters and you salt on the roads and you do any of this kind of work, you'll know exactly why. You'll know exactly why we do this. Okay, next, get our rotor out of the plastic. Now, some of you may or may not know this, but rotors, new ones, when they come from the parts store, they come with a film of oil on them to keep them from rusting inside the box. And you can see there, just pull that out of the plastic, but you can see there's a film of something on this rotor, and we need to clean that off. And all we're going to use is some good old generic O'Reilly's brake parts cleaner, or whatever parts cleaner, brake parts cleaner you got. Spray it on a rag. We're going to clean this off. Nice and clean now. You can see the difference, I'm sure. That's what you want it to look like before you put it on your car. Now we're ready to go on the car. Okay. And it's going to be floppy like that until we get our caliper mounting bracket back on. Let's work on it next. A couple of things here you should know. First is that these, where our caliper mount bolts went to, these are the caliper slide pins, and these actually can come out. In fact, I'll work it out here so you can see. This is a little rubber bellows that just clips over the front of this, and then this is a cavity on both sides that is, I don't want to say filled with grease, but it definitely has some grease in here to allow this mount to slide back and forth as the pads wear, as you apply them and take off the brake pressure. So what I do is I'll twist them, I'll pull them out and make sure that they are free to move, because sometimes over the years, you could hear that one got a little suction on it. Sometimes over the years they get stuck in place, and you know, we don't want that. We want these things to be free and able to move with no restriction. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to pull, and then I'm going to pull this rubber part down and expose the pin itself. There you go. And then this thing, there you can see some of that grease in there. This thing will just slide right on out, just like that. And then some of them have this that rubber part on the bottom. Some don't. I don't know the difference off the top of my head, but I do know that if you pull this one out and it's got it on the bottom, this one probably does not. So don't mix up the holes where they came out of. Okay, just make sure that these little rubber bellows are in good shape. If there's grease in there, clearly there is. I only pulled this one out so you could see it. And if they're stuck, make sure you get them freed up. Then you can just literally push this back in the bore. And you can push this down and you'll get that rubber bellows to clip over the top of that bolt again. And you can leave it like this, but when you push it down like that, it creates a vacuum. When you pull it out, you can lift up the side of the top of this rubber bellows with a flat blade and let some of the air in there and let it equalize pressure. But in all actuality, this is not going to be moving that much. You know, it's not going to be moving like this when you press the brakes, or you got huge problems. That's a personal preference thing, just to keep, you know, some pressure off that rubber bellows. But that's how that part works. All right, as far as removing the pads themselves, these are just simply gonna, you can just push them on into the inside. This is a brake wear indicator. This is what makes your brakes squeak when they get so low. Just push that in. Now the new one's going on. I've got the Wagner OEX1184s. These were about, for the kit for the front was about $5 at O'Reilly's, which is where I get everything. So the first thing that I do is I always match up the new to the old and make sure that they're more or less the same size, shape, all that stuff. And again, you can tell the ones I'm taking off aren't that old, but this is more or less for demonstration purposes, and it's my son's car, so I figure I'll do him a solid. Make sure the tabs look like they're the same size and in the same spot. I'm trying to give you a close-up so you can really see what I'm looking at here. And that you'll notice the new ones don't come with this wear indicator pre-installed. That's something that you have to put on there. It comes in the kit. So if you decide to put these on, and you don't have to, but if you decide to put them on, they go on like this. Okay, and they just clip on one end, either end, doesn't matter. And they're just kind of a spring clamp fit. So you work it over one side, give it a push, and then it's on there. Then when the brake pad gets low enough to where this is touching your rotor, that's going to make that horrible screeching sound, and you'll know that you are definitely due for a brake pad change at minimum, if not the rotor itself. The other thing is on these Wagners, and I've seen this more and more this year, I don't know if it's a Wagner thing or it's just a new way to do it, but most of the time you'll see brake pads, especially in the Performance series, where they'll have the cut down the middle here, straight down the middle, and that gives the brake dust somewhere to collect and fall down, so that you're not building up all the brake dust, ruining your wheels, and making screeching sounds from brake dust. Some of these newer pads, they've got the nice little S shape in there. I don't know, probably just because it looks cool, but just know that that's alright. So the next thing you're going to want to do on your caliper mount here is you've got within it, you've got these metal retaining clips in here. On some caliper mount brackets, they span this entire, they kind of bridge this gap here. On this one, you've got 1, 2, and then 3, 4 up top. So to remove these, because your new kit will come with it, you're just going to pry up on this tab here. It might be stuck in there a little bit. Just pry up. It'll eventually come up. And then your new brake kit will come with new ones. They are not all identical. So there's the one that we're going to use to replace it, but there are left and right sides to this as well. So here you can see it's the same but the opposite direction. So this is going to go on the other side down here that I haven't taken off yet. And once you get one out, I like to give it a little bit of a cleaning. The wire brush. Just make sure it's as clean as you can make it reasonably. Not a hugely critical thing. And then this part, the new one, is just going to clip right in place where the old one was. Get it lined up in there. give it a pop, and that's it. And we're going to do the same thing to that one and the two here on the other side. Okay, my pro tip on these is to go one side at a time, because if you take all four of the old ones out, I mean, you'll figure out what was the orientation, which way did these things bend in, did they bend in, did they bend out. It's just a lot easier. Take one out, replace it with the same kind. Take the next one out, replace it with the same kind. That way you don't get yourself confused. Now, the next step is to take some disc brake caliper grease, and we're going to put just a little bit of that on each one of these four parts here, and that is going to help the brake pad slide back and forth on it, and it's also going to keep the noise down while it's doing that. And you don't have to go crazy here. Just a little bit of this stuff goes a long way. I'm going to put just a little bit right there, smear it around, get it on this thing, get it on that thing. Okay, just a little bit in there, and do that on all four. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and put in our new pads. So clearly you want the business side to be facing in. Don't put it in backwards, because you probably can. These are going to fight you. It's just what they do, but all you want to do is just kind of get them started in the channels of those clips that we just put in. Just get them started. If you push it too far, if you bring it in too far this way, this is going to pop out in the center of this bracket and come out. And you're going to get ticked off, and frustration is the enemy. So we don't want that. All we want is to just get these started in here, and then move it right up like that, and then that's more or less exactly where it needs to be. Alright, back at the car. You're going to slide your new pads over the rotor. Okay, see, they're going over. And I'm going to have to push my rotor on just a little bit. Try to hold everything in place without it falling off on you. Can be difficult, especially if you're by yourself and trying to film it. Okay, so there we've got, don't worry if there's a big gap there, we're going to take care of that. So now we've got the pads over the rotor. We're going to go ahead and put in the big mount bolts, those 17s down here. And then the next thing we're going to do is push in our caliper piston, and we're going to lube up the caliper itself. Here I've got a C-clamp over the back of the caliper, and then on the rim of the piston itself. If you're not comfortable doing it this way, don't do it this way. A lot of times what you'll do is put the old brake pad here in front of the piston and put the C-clamp on the brake pad to push the piston in. But because I'm just kind of showing you how to do this, and I know that this car is in good shape anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do it like this. But, you know, what is it, caveat emptor, buyer beware, do this at your own risk. All right, they make tools for this where it wedges in between this part of the caliper, and it pushes down on the piston, pushes it back in the bore. If you don't want to buy it, you can just use a C-clamp. A big one is fine. This one is almost just too small to use for this purpose, which is why I am not using a brake pad. But just to show you the concept here, and you can see, or should be able to see, that piston slowly retracting in as I'm doing this. And you will need to do this, because if you don't, you will not be able to get this to slide over this mounting assembly with the new pads, because the new pads are thicker than the ones you took off, even if there's not much wear on them. And when you're compressing the piston, it should be a nice easy twist on your C-clamp or your tool. It should be nothing hard. if you're cranking down on it, it's not moving, something's wrong. Either you're cranking down on the wrong part of the caliper on the piston or something, or the piston itself is seized in the bore. But you're probably going to know this before you even do this kind of work, because your car, when you are braking, it's going to jerk to one side and come back to center, jerk to one side and come back to center. The side that it's jerking towards when you hit the brakes is the side that's working. The side that has the stuck piston in the bore is going to be the side where it's jerking away from. And I've had this happen on an old Nova that I had, and it was clear something was wrong. And I ended up having to replace the entire caliper on that. Tried to rebuild it. The bleeder broke off inside the caliper. It's a whole mess, so I just replaced the whole caliper. So now that we've got this on here, what I'm going to do is kind of squeeze the old sandwich together. Okay, because we want as much room as possible. I'm going to clean this surface off and the surface of the piston here, and I'm going to put a little bit of that blue grease on there. And there you can see got a little bit of the blue goo on there, and I always put just a little bit on the piston itself. Now we should be able to slide this up and over the brake pads, and that's that. Let's put our two caliper mount bolts back in here. Okay, let's get them started. And there you can see that on this one, that caliper slide pin is wanting to rotate a little bit, but it's no problem. It's either going to stop or you can get a wrench on some of the flats there. No big deal. Going to tighten these up. Going to tighten up the caliper bracket bolts, the big ones, the 17s. And tighten up your 14s. Put your tire back on, and that, friends, is a brake job on a Yaris. A couple things to remember. Number one, when you get it all back together, this is normal for a minute. It's okay if it's flopping around. What's going to happen is you're going to get your tire on here, or you can actually do this before you put the tire on. Go inside the car, pump the brake pedal. The first time you pump the brake pedal, after you've replaced the brakes, it's going to feel like, or it will go all the way down to the floor. That is because you are pushing fluid through the line back to the piston and pushing the piston back out of its bore some. Remember, we retracted it all the way. Well, it needs to be out some. So as you push that pedal in, it's going to sink. Don't go, uh-oh, I did something wrong. Nope, pump it again, maybe even a third time, and by the third time or fourth at the most. That pedal should be nice, hard, firm. It should not be sinking down to the floor anymore. And if you come out here and you check this, this will no longer be floppy like this. It's going to be firm because the brake pads are going to be seated right around that rotor now. Make sure that you check your fluid. As we pushed the pistons back in, the extra fluid goes back into the reservoir. Make sure that your reservoir isn't over full now. You don't want brake fluid coming out of the top cap in there and dripping down into your engine bay. It will eat the paint off of anything. It's very corrosive stuff. Okay. And the first time you take the car out on the road and drive it, a lot of times with performance pads, there's a break-in. You know, your first 3 stops should be from, should be at like 25% pedal. Your next 3 stops should be at 50% pedal. Your next 3 should be at 75% pedal. Try to get things seated into each other. On a car like this, I don't even care. You do it however you want. Just go out and drive it. But listen for noises. Make sure your pedal feels right. You shouldn't feel any pulsing. If you hear screeching, whether you are applying the brakes or not, check out this backing plate, because you may have accidentally pushed it in. See how flexible that is? You may have accidentally pushed it in, and now it is scraping on the rotor. Especially if when the caliper was out, if you were banging on this thing with a hammer to get the rotor off, real easy to hit this part or the part down below, bend it in, and it's going to scrape on your rotor and make a terrible noise. If you hear noises only when the brakes are applied, check your lug nuts. Make sure your lug nuts are tight. Sometimes that's where that manifests itself, is in loose lug nuts. If it's not the lug nuts, make sure that these bolts are tight, the 14s and the 17s back here. If you still got noises, use your common sense, see what's going on with it. You will probably find the problem fairly readily. And that's all there is to this job. If you got any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.